Hi everybody, welcome to Yerushalmi Megillah Daf Mem. So we're actually at the bottom, second line from the bottom, Daf Lametes Amid Beis. Turgamon. And Turgamon, um, in those days you had an Amora, and then you had an Amora with a loud voice who also was able to explain things. He was like kind of like a loudspeaker. So Shuvaim Lufnei Chacham. So you have a Turkmen who was also an Amoritz Rabbi. He himself was a Talmud Chacham in his own right. He was standing in front of the Talmud Chacham. As the Chacham would give the shir, he would call out the shir. So Ein Rishon Lo Lashanis, he can't change anything. Lo Lakanis, no kinuyim, no nicknames, no shortening of anything. Lo Lohesiv, he can't add anything either. Elam Kain Hoya Aviv Oy Rabbi, unless it was his father or the Rebbe of the Meturgimin, then he can make a slight change out of respect for his father's Rebbe to avoid saying his name, as we'll see in a second. Reb Das have a motor to Reb Yasa. Reb Das was the loudspeaker, we'll say, of Reb Yasa. Again, loudspeaker has to mean a derogatory. I mean, he was the one who repeated the share so everybody can hear it. Now, Reb Das's father, Reb Lezer, was the Rebbe of Reb Yasa. Okay. So Mil Nisham Avoy have a Mekacham a Rebbe b'Shem Abba. So when Rabbi Yossi said something in the name of Rabbi Das's father Ablezer, so if Rabbi Das himself had heard directly from his father, he would not say his father's name, he would say Rebbe b'Shem Abba. Kacham a Rebbe b'Shem Abba. Milan de lo shamim Minova directly, but if what Rabbi Yossi was saying, Rabbi Das had not heard directly from his father, Hava Amma came Amma Rebbe b'Shem Rebbe Lezer. Then he would say his father's name. Now, exactly what the cheshbon is here, a bit different mafarshim here. So the first thing to know is that to say, it's brought down that to say, if you say Reb instead of your father's before you say father's name, you give him a title, Reb, then there's not an Inyan not to say a father's name. There's no disrespect in that. That's number one. The other thing, number two, in terms of things that he heard directly from his father, he didn't have to quote his Rebbe, Reb Yassan. So things where Reb Das heard directly from his father, Reb Lezer, even though Reb Yasser was repeating them, since he didn't have to quote it, since he himself had heard it, he didn't have to say it exactly the way his Rebbe, Reb Yasser said it. Okay. Bayeshita, similar story. Hava Moira, the Rebbe Vo. Milan de Shama min Ovoy, have Ama Kain Ama Rebbe Shem Abba, Milan lo Shama Ovoy, Ama Kain Rebbe Shem Rebbe Chinina. Okay. Ramona Kata Havas Moire Bechabur to when it's paskening in public with a chabura, like we would say today, Milan de Shama Ovoy base. If he heard Piskei Halacha from his father at home as a son, have Ama Kain Ama Rebbe, have Ama Kain Ama Avi, Abba. Just to change the gears a little bit, however, I used to say Kainam Abba. He said, this is what my father said. Mil Neshaman Over Beis Vada, things that he heard from his father in the Beis Medrash, in other words, with his father wearing his Rebbe hat, have a Mekena Rebbe Yoina. Then he would say Rebbe Yoina, like we said before, saying Reb ahead of his father's name is no issue of disrespect. Okay. Next thing we said in the mission is Mechana Ba'arayas. He's Mechana. What does that mean? Ba'arayas Davuya, Ba'arayas the embarrassment of the father, embarrassment of the mother. We explained yesterday in other words, he's saying instead of saying it refers to sexual organs straight out, instead he says it's the embarrassment of the father. We don't like that. Yusa, we said yesterday, Ton Rabbi Shmuel, Zeshu Noise Aramis, Mamed Mimena Bonim, Mamed Oivin Lamakim. Somebody who marries a guy and has children from her is creating now enemies to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Kabbalah brings down the reason, the basis for that is because even if they're Megayer, but they unfortunately Yarshan traits that are not traits of a Yehudi, right? By Shonim, Rachmanim, Gam Chasadim, and even though a person converted, not necessarily does he come with those traits. Okay, he doesn't have the traits that are associated with the Yid. Sagt der Mishnah Lochid Aleph, Mais Ruvain Nikrum Lamitarkim. Mais Ruvain, the story of Ruvain, where he was spoke at that Mais Ruvain Bebila, right? So that is Nikra and not Metag. We don't touch it. Maisa Tama, Nikra Metag. Maisa Tama and Yehuda is both Nikra and Metag. Maisa Egel or Rishon, Nikra Metag. The first time the Torah brings down what happened by the Egel, that's red and we're Metagim it. Hashem and Nikra, however, V'loy Metagim. Birchis Koyanim, we'll see why later about Birchis Koyanim specifically. Or Maisa David Amnon and the story of David and Amnon. Loy Nikrin, V'loy Metagim. Right, Amnon is the one who slept with a sister. So and the Maisa with David is Bathsheba, as a story of David and Bathsheba. We don't read those and we're not attacking those at all. And it's because anyway, okay, we'll see that later. Ksiv, it says Asher Chachamim Yagidu Lo Kichadu Mevoisum. They didn't run away, they didn't try to fool or get away from their fathers. Maschar not lakach. So this is talking about the Maisa of Yehuda and Ruvain specifically. Now, darshaning over here that Ruvain learned from Yehuda. In other words, when Ruvain saw that Yehuda was Maida what happened, right, with Tamar. So Reuven went and he was also Maida. So it's like Mascha not lokach. What do they get? What was their reward for this? Is that the next pasuk after this, the very next pasuk is Lahem Levad Nasna Aretz Lo Avazar B'Toicham. There are two things. First, Lahem Levad Nasna Aretz obviously doesn't mean they're the only ones who got the land. It just means that that Yehuda was Zeichel Malchus, that he got extra power, and Ruvain was the first to take. They were the first shave to take on Eva Yard, and they got their chelik. That was the schab. Lo Ya'ov Azor B'Toicham is they were benched together by by Moshe. He Ruvain, and then comes afterwards V'Zois Yehuda, because they were connected. That they both had this midah of Haidah. Ezo Maisa Egel Hasheni. Okay, specifically, what psukim? Where does the Maisa Egel Hasheni start? So it's Machlokes Rav Simon Shem Rav Yehoshua ben Levi, Mitshuva Sheish of Moshe es Aaron, from where Moshe responds to Aaron, Ad Kiparoi Aaron L'Shim to become. It's very embarrassing for Aaron. So Sheheshiv Moshe's Aaron, as Moshe says to Aaron, "Meselcha mazeh." So from that point until Kifroi Aaron, that's the Ma'aseh Glosheni. Chanani Bashami B'Shem Rav, he says actually Mitshuva Shevi Aaron as Moshe ad Kifroi Aaron L'Shem to become. He goes a little bit further, and he talks about over there where Aaron says V'Yom Aaron, where the pasuk starts over there by Yom Aaron, and Aaron tells him what happened. So it's from that point until the end. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky brings down actually a cute shot. He says, how can we skip all that? Just skip out the part with Aaron, say everything else, right? It's embarrassing to Aaron, fine. So he says that the reason for that is because people see only skipping, one pasuk. Everybody's going to go and see what did we skip? Rabbi skipped something in Russia. He goes right away to see what's exciting, what can't we learn. So same thing would apply over here. So if we skip that whole parsha, okay. Rabbi Acha b'Shem Rabba, Umacha Hashem Yas'ama ala she'asa sa'egel she'asa Aaron. Actually, it's the only part the Egel Hasheni that we skip is only where it says Vayigoif es ha'am, because that's and okay, we'll see. The Gemara is going to explain why Dafka that Inyan of Vayigoif es ha'am. We were talking about the in general. Rab Mar Ukvan b'Shem Rabbanan the Tamon of Bavel Lloyd Doime Gnai Yochid B'Tzibur Gnai Tzibur Tzibur. It's much more embarrassing for a public to be embarrassed. Bas Kidam Reb Chelba B'Shem Rav Chuna Birchas Kohanim Nikrois V'Loy Nikrois V'Loy Mitagos. Okay, Chaim Kanievsky changes the gears over here. We'll just go with that gears because it matches the Mishnah the way it's printed here as opposed to the way it is in the Bavli. It says Birchas Kohanim Loy Nikrois V'Loy Mitagos. Why? So Rabba Bar Kohen Boy Kum Reb Yosi Matang. What's the reason for that? Amalei Kois V'Orach L'Bracha Nitna V'Loy Nitna L'Kriya. That it was given to be benched with, but it's not given L'Kriya. Okay, you can say also it's not Maturgim for the same reason. I'm just going to go with Chaim because he amends it, and as an Achron, I think he was able to be to be malakit in general. By the way, Reb Chaim, default is the parish that I go to in the Yerushalmi because he was the Achron. He had a lot more in front of him, I think, than many of the other Mefarshim. Okay. Zok Teli Mishnah Lochi Yud Beis. Ein maftin b'merkava. Famous, right? We don't want to talk about kava. Uh, Rabbi Yehuda Matir, Rabbi Yehuda says you could. Rabbi Eliezer Me'em Aftirim Ba'ida Es Yerushalayim Es Toiv. We don't want to embarrass Yerushalayim. We're talking about negative things, so we don't want to do that. So talking about Em Aftirim Rekav of Rabbi Yehuda Matir, Rabbi Eliezer Me'em Aftirim Ba'ida Es Yerushalayim Es Toiv. So talking about Ma'isa Be'echad. There's a story of a person shifted Ba'ida Es Yerushalayim Es Toiv. Guess in those days maybe you could pull out after learn whatever you want. So he did read this fellow read it. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. She told the guy, you go, go see some negative things about your mother. And they checked after him, and what do you know of an mamzer? It turns out the guy's mother was a little bit pulling some hanky-panky, and this guy himself was a mamzer. So you don't know it's me to connect me that he was exposing the negatives of Yerushalayim, so his negatives were exposed. The dam mezuzah yavin lo heicha. Where do we put a mezuzah? So Reb Chaim says that over here, this is brought down over here, and so on the Mefarshim talk about it as well. What is this doing over here? When no one discussing about mezuzah, maybe because we're talking about tefillin, so might as well talk about mezuzah too. Um, so now, Reb Zura, Reb Yehuda, V'Shem Shmuel, Mishal Shoy. Need a little bit of imagination for this. Mishal Shoy v'Noisnoi b'Tchilas Shlish Ha'elyon. So you split the doorway into three, one, two, and three. Right? So you have three, I'm sorry, you have one, two, three. So and the beginning, in other words, the bottom part of the upper third of the door is where the mezuzah would go. Fine. Reb Chel b'Shem Reb Chuna, Choitzes HaPesach, he split the doorway into halves. So first you take the doorway, split into two halves, one, two, and then you take that upper half and you split it into three. So you have one, two, and three. And mishalsha, like I just said, v'noisne v'sof shlish hatachton. And you put it at the bottom also, into the upper half of the door. You have the bottom part here. This is the bottom third. That's where you put the mezuzah. Okay. Um, Ma beinehain. So it kind of sounds very similar because there's an overlap between the areas here. They don't overlap exactly, but that bottom third, if you cut the doorway in half, and the upper third, just by keeping it as thirds, kind of overlap. So we think it sounds to us like they're roughly in the same place. So Mocha mezuzah beinehain. Okay, well, the Gemara doesn't give us much to go on over here. So of course everybody goes to town on this. We'll just go to carbonated pshat because I just found it to be the most straightforward. The Malka mezuzah obviously is where exactly did he put the mezuzah? So I'll just read from the Karbon Eda. The Karbon Eda says, Ike beinayu, dil Reb Zeira, according to Reb Zeira, who says that he doesn't mention anything about splitting the doorway in half. He just says he split the whole doorway into thirds. So according to him, ha-mezuzah atzmo nitna kula b'shlish elyon. You tie mezuzah in the upper third of the doorway. Fine. Reb Chelboi soifa b'tchila shlish ha'elyon v'atzmo nitna b'soif shlish ha'emtzai. That the way it works is you have the top of the mezuzah is in the upper third of the doorway. V'atzma nitma b'soif shlish ha'emtzai. But the most of the mezuzah itself is actually the middle third of the doorway. Now it's leaving the chaitzei on the side for now. So according to Rev Zeira, it's all the entire mezuzah is in the upper third of the doorway. According to Rev Chelboi, the top of the mezuzah is in the upper third. The rest of it is in the middle third of the doorway. I hope that's not too confusing. Um, I thought that was the most straightforward pshat. And the Gemara is not specific about this at all. Doesn't mention any of these things. Okay. Ba'atavri shol Rabbi Yitzchak hagatz mechosho yishar gavoya. Right. He said he put in the upper third. Okay, so he put in the upper third. Now the doorway is 30 feet high. Who's going to see the mezuzah? So Amalei nitna kineg seifo. So then you put it shoulder height. You don't have to put it in the upper third. Again, this is what they did. Rabbi Yirmiyah, because it's very tall. The entrance to the Beis Medrash of Chanina's Pasha is not what we call a Beis Medrash today, or Shtibel. It was a high, like an imposing kind of shul, a sanctuary. So they didn't put it on the upper third, they put it in shoulder height. Bei Rabbi Yirmiyah b'Shem Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak beis mezuzase shel Rabbi hayasa kimin nager. Rabbi, again, there's a couple of different shots. I'm just going to go with the carbonated shots, most simple. The Bavli does bring pshat. I believe that argues on this. I think it's Machlekes also Rashi and some other Mepharshim over there, but just go with the straight. Nagar is like a peg. So, in other words, if this is the doorway, the mezuzah was flat, straight in, like that. That's how he put the mezuzah. Straight in. Okay. Um, Talia Badeles. If he hung it on the door, let's say he hung up the mezuzah on the door instead of on the door post, sakana shein ba mitzvah. It's a sakana because the mezuzah is meant to be shmira, so you get no shmira, and there's no mitzvah to do that either. Chalkak b'rosh hamakel. So let's say he takes, and this, by the way, you see this in Eretz Yisrael, where they put the mezuzah into a tube, and then they insert that because they have those big bricks, and they insert it into the doorway. So that's what we're talking about over here. Chokek roisha makel. So he takes a stick and he hollows out the stick and he puts the mezuzah inside. V'nicha b'makom she'enu roi loi, and he puts it in a place, let's say behind the door, where it's not fit to be there. So sakana she'em a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. Rebbe b'shem Reb Yehuda va'afilu loy samra. So now the mashmos is the only issue what we just said, that if you put it in a malkum she'enu roi loi, is the problem is that you took the stick. In this case, maybe say it's talking about a big stick, let's say. So you put in a stick, and the problem is that you put it behind the door, right? So mashma says, but if you took it the way it is now and you just leaned it on the doorpost, you'd be out to it. That's a freightimar filo summary. If you didn't nail it into the doorpost, Vatani was just we learned that you have to nail it into the doorpost. And Rabbi Yosef, who she if you miyachid it for that place, and if you put it in a way that it's a fixed there, that it's obvious that's meant to be there permanently, you don't have to nail it in. Shel beis maloin, hoyoisen came with full messias. So there were Jewish soldiers. Nothing changes. So you had Jewish draftees, the soldiers, when they were going around and they were going from place to place. Would sleep in a hotel. They would take a stick with the mezuzah inside and put it on the doorpost. And the reason that they did that is a zechi, not really yotzim, is just by putting it there temporarily. That's according to the first pshat, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky brings down a second pshat, but we'll go with the first one. It was just a zechi. Taka wasn't meant to be. They're not mechuyev. If you're there for a night in a hotel room, not mechuyev to put up a mezuzah. But I guess they wanted some kind of shmir. They felt it's better nothing. They put it there for a zechi mezuzah. Shmuel Amel Nasnul Fnimi Tefach Psula. If you burrow it into the doorpost more than a tefach, so you stick it in more than a tefach deep into the doorpost, you're not yaitza. We'll stop here and we'll take up tomorrow where Shema is supposed to be in the case of the two psachim.